That was lovely, wasn't it?
Yes, it's one of my favorite.
Fantastic. Dear listeners and viewers, wherever you are, hello and welcome to your weekly meeting with us on your program, Spectra. Tonight is a very special meeting. Today is a very special episode with an extremely special guest. The Aboriginal people, the First Nations, the Indians, the indigenous people, les autochtones, all are different names we've heard. We've also heard the names Dean, Inuit, Mohawk, Métis. All these are different names for people who originally occupied the land between Alaska and the tip of Argentina. We've heard many stories about them. We've seen many things in movies. A lot of stereotypes have been floating around. But who are those people? What is the reality of those people? What is their culture like? How is their life in the past? And how's their life in the present? What are the dreams and aspirations for the future? To answer all these questions and much more, tonight, I'm really delighted to be accompanied by an extra special, Aboriginal, Indian, Indigenous, First Nation, multi-talented, a person with versatile skills. I'm really delighted to be accompanied by Cindy Martin. Cindy, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me here. It's been an honor to be asked to sit with you tonight. Scanos Wagwego, Ne Iwahanwi Giaso. I was saying hello to everyone, and my name is Carrier of News. And I wanted to be able to explain any questions that people might have, or just to give people information about myself and my people. And my language, my cultural background is Cayuga from the Haudenosaunee people, or the Six Nations of the Grand River.
Again, really, thank you very much for giving us this opportunity, and thank you very much for having us on your land. Mm-hmm. And Cindy, to start off, like I said, you're a person with versatile, like skills, multi-talented person. Mm-hmm. I didn't really know where to start and where to end. So can you kindly shed some light? Tell us who Cindy is.
Yes, I'd be happy to share myself with you and the listeners. My background is of the Cayuga Nation, and my clan is the Turtle. And we have Six Nations that have came in peace and unified since time began. There is the Mohawk, the Senecas, Cayugas, Onondaga, Oneidas, and the Tuscaroras are the sixth one.
Great, and you are a person with many, many skills.
Yes.
You're an artist. You're an activist. You are. Like, so, to do you justice, I prefer that you introduce yourself really to us.
Sure.
Because, like I told you, I really don't know where to start and where to end.
Well, I have lived and worked in my community for 24 years as a health promotion worker, but I was also a firefighter for 9 years, and I am very active in the community by volunteering in different areas of sports and arts and culture, and I really enjoy what I do. I'm an instructor for paddling various boats with the Galway Canoe Club, and I also an instructor for archery for the Six Nations Archery Program.
Great. And you're a musician too.
Yes, I like to sing, and I'm also, learning to play a guitar. But I've been with two bands, and I really enjoy entertaining, being a speaker. I've written a book, and I'm also a cast member for What About Us?
Perfect. Perfect. So to start off, let's start from the very beginning.
Mm-hmm.
So First Nations, about 11,000 years ago, and sometimes it's, according to many other, historians, it's much more than that. And, my role here would be just to tell you what people might know, but you're the expert here, okay?
Okay.
So the popular story tells us that about 11,000 years ago, towards the end of the last ice age,
Mm-hmm.
people from Asia migrated to North America, and they came to Alaska and then went all the way down to Mexico. To Argentina.
Mm-hmm.
How correct or incorrect is this story from your point of view?
I believe, everybody has been placed on their own landmass, each continent, and they were given that area, that territory. And so before, we have our creation story, and the creation story talked about that the land was covered, the earth was covered with water.
Mm-hmm.
And there, at the time, there wouldn't have been any people. The only living creatures here would be the water animals and the birds. They had orally, we have our creation story talk about a woman falling from the sky, and she was from the sky world. And so as she was falling, the birds came to her rescue, and she landed gently on their back. And because of the commotion of her screaming and the birds calling out, this giant sea turtle had risen from the depths of the ocean, the water, and was floating there. And that was the spot that those birds chose to let her rest, was on the back of the turtle.
So that's Turtle Island.
Yes, this would be the
That's where
beginning.
Turtle Island comes from.
Yes.
The story. Yeah.
And the different creatures that were bottom dwellers, they were certain ones may have tried to go and get soil from the bottom. Some land creatures as well, that muskrat, the ones that swam in the water. So when they would come up, the Sky Woman was able to gather the soil from under the claws of one of those animals. And the story is that she took the little amount of soil and rolled it in her hands to make that ball, and she kept on rolling it, and the landmass started to grow, and it was so large that she had to walk on it and follow the sun to help it spread over the turtle's back. So when that landmass was all done, then the turtle broke apart from the bottom and then moved on. So when they talk about that, people had their different areas. Our Creator, the story of that goes. There's a chunk there that talks about it, but I'm just going to go fast forward a little bit. But they had the story is that the native people were fashioned from the red soil, from the red earth, and then the Creator blew 3 times into that molding of that native, or the man with the red earth, right? But the story is that the black person was also made from a black soil, and and the yellow person was made from the inside of a tree bark, and the inside was taken from that and molded. And then the last one, were the non-native or the white people. They were fashioned from the foam of the ocean.
Okay.
So that was the four types that they were created, and life was blown into them to give them that life, that breath of life.
It's an amazing story indeed. It's, again, when you talked, and I believe, our listeners and viewers here, when you talked about the Turtle Island and like the flood, I think this rang a bell to a couple of viewers, because there's a huge similarity between this story and a biblical and a Quranic story about Noah's Ark. And there was a great flood that covered all the earth again, but yours has a different tweak to it, because it's more related to all sources of nature. Mm-hmm. Like, again, in Noah's Ark, he took with him couples of all kinds of creatures that lived, and the hero in the story is the pigeon. Mm-hmm. So the pigeon, like, returning with, an olive tree branch, and this is where the peace sign came from later on, to show that there was land. But here we have the birds and the turtle, mm-hmm. and there is direct connection again. You talked about the very first woman, mm-hmm. which is quite similar to Eve, according to Abrahamic religions, but in your story, there is direct connection between nature, creatures, and the woman, and land, and the woman is the source. Mm-hmm. So in the Abrahamic religions, it's Adam and Eve, but here it is the woman. She is the actual source of everything here.
Yeah. She was, when she had fell, she was carrying a child within her. And so as part of that time where she had finished making the land, she had certain food items and plants and seeds that she was able to utilize to sustain her life. And mm-hmm. and so when the baby was born, they had some aspect of food to survive, and the aspect of that this young child, this baby grew and she was impregnated by the spirit of the wind. Okay. And so that aspect of, there wasn't a male figure, mm-hmm. but there was two women that were part of the first two people on earth. And then from that woman having a baby, becoming pregnant with the West Wind's babies, there was twins in there. And they talk about that the first twin was born naturally, the second twin was born unnaturally and came out from her side. Mm-hmm. And so when the grandmother came upon her daughter who had already passed away, she had blamed the wrong twin. And so she favored the other one that had really actually caused the death of her daughter. And so they had buried her into the earth. And when they buried her there, she became our Mother Earth. Okay. And so from her grave grew these plants. And there were the corn from her chest, and the squash from her belly, and from her fingers grew the beans. And there was root foods such as potatoes that grew from her feet. Mm-hmm. So so those foods were considered sustenance or sisters to us to provide for food for our
And how about people. The two twins? Anything about them, like when they grew up?
Yes. As they were growing, they were at odds with each other. Mm-hmm. The one twin that was born naturally, he created life and more animals and plants, and and he was the one that created those moldings of people and images.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other twin, his brother, would go and sabotage what he'd make. So, if he made the rose, he would come over and he would take and put the thorns on the roses. And if he made a little a snake, he would put some teeth on it and make it deadly to hurt those people.
Okay.
So everything that he was making, he was changing it to
So changing every virtue to a vice, like every good thing to a bad thing.
Or endanger something else, right? So
exactly. Again, it's really amazing because I think, like our listeners and viewers again, the story you just said, has a lot of bits and pieces that are almost identical to some stories in Abrahamic religions, like, for instance, asexual pregnancy, so pregnancy. So like the woman was pregnant without any sexual interaction with a male. And this is very, very similar to the story of Jesus, who was his mother was a virgin and she was pregnant through the Holy Spirit, which is in your case through the wind. And another thing as well, the twins, the good and the bad, again, very similar to the story of Cain and Abel, the two sons of Adam and Eve.
Yes, very similar.
Yeah, very similar. And Cain was the evil guy and Abel was the good guy. And so that's really amazing, to see, all the world. And a very important question that I think a lot of people would wonder about before we get into much more details. What did the First Nations think of the rest of the world? Did they ever think that they were because it was mutual actually, because for people living in Europe, in Africa, in Asia, they thought that this was the world. That's it, no more. So did people living in North and South America. But having said that, we must remember that they came from Asia. So actually, they were the very first people to discover the New World. So the New World was not discovered in the 1450s and after, by Christopher Columbus and John Cabot and whatnot. It was really discovered by the Aboriginal people. They were the very first people to discover the New World.
Well, I would have to disagree with you only because we know that at one point the continents were all together in one mass, right?
Pangaea was like a big island in the center of water.
And then there was some type of rift, the continental that ripped apart the continent for whatever reason, but with that is that the people were already here when that had happened. So it wasn't them moving from the top of the world and coming down. It was they were already separated, and from what I understand, that the Creator had intentionally put us in our own regions to separate us, so that we would have our own peace. We're in our own lands, so and we have the different regions for specifically. For our own cultures, whether the Africans lived in Africa, the Oriental Chinese people lived in their territory, the Europeans lived in their territory. So they were all separated for a specific reason. And so, like they had said, that our people were separated from the rest of the world. And I think that we were here on this earth as part of it. And
that's very interesting, although it's completely different from the popular story. The popular story says at the end of the Ice Age, around 11,000 years ago, people migrated from, Asia, and they went to maybe Siberia. They started, like on foot, and then they came to Alaska. At that time, there was no water. There were great ice sheets. So they walked in that, came to Alaska, and came all the way down to, Argentina. So your stories is very different. So you say that people were there in the first place.
Yeah.
So these places were not they were already inhabited by people. People live there, and it's because of the continental drift. So we have these, because Pangaea was just one big landmass in the center of and was a huge island surrounded by water, and then the continental drift started, and then they started becoming the different continents we know today.
Yeah, and it's only because it validates our teaching is when archaeologists find older than artifacts and it's because of science today they can actually identify how old those artifacts are, or the people that they're discovering as being real, and it gives validity to our indigenous stories.
So the indigenous people thought or believed that there were other people living in other places. They did not think that the world is only in North and South America.
We were just content with our own territory, the North, South, and Central America. So we weren't voyagers going across to see what's on the other side. We were,
But were you thinking, did they believe at all that there were other people in other places?
In one of our stories, we go back to the time where my people were at war, and we had this man that was called the peacemaker, and he's the one who brought peace, strength, and good mind to our people, and he was very instrumental to help us understand that we shouldn't be warring. And one of the things was that after some time, we kind of forgot where we were, and he came to teach us, this other man came to teach us who the aspects of giving thanks, and he gave us our original instructions to give thanks to the Creator and help us live within creation. And so one of those stories is that he said he had to go across the big water to another people, and he struck this tree. And
so the big water here being the Atlantic or the Pacific Ocean?
It would have been the Atlantic.
The Atlantic Ocean. Okay, yeah.
And so he had hit the tree, and he said that if I get killed, this tree is going to run red. And so there was time that went, and people were looking at the tree, and one day it did run red. And that man, he came back, and they said that he came to do one last ceremony for us to learn. And so they noticed that he looked a little different. He had wounds on his hands and his feet, and they said that he was to teach us this game that we were to play, and it was called the Peace Pit ceremony. And so that was the last one, but he said that they didn't receive his message, his words, and they had killed him, and that was his last thing here was to teach us that game. So that's how we understand the relationship with Jesus, and was that he was here first with us, and then he went over to across the water.
Okay.
Yeah. So with that story, it meant that that he laid out the foundation for us to be ambassadors of peace, and so we do our best to continue our ceremonies since time came. Even though we've had suffered strife and misery, and from residential school, and plagues, and it's just been,
and we'll get to this
survival.
definitely.
So I just wanted to let you know, we only knew about the people across the water from his input.
Hmm. Absolutely. But like it's obvious that, you have this, incredible bond with nature because like you would say that you and vegetables, trees and so on, like your brothers and sisters, you're from the same mother.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Yes.
you all came through the same earth, Mother Earth.
Mm-hmm.
And the first mother gave her body to the earth,
Mm-hmm.
and from it came everything else.
Yeah.
So like can you sort of like shed more light on this? Like how's the relationship between First Nations and the environment?
Well, if you have been following media, we as Indigenous people protect our earth and our water and the air. That's the basis of our survival as human beings and all life here on Earth. If we continue to have the pipelines go through, the risk of having spills and just affecting wildlife and the water and fish, it breaks our heart. So we as Indigenous people, we really want to continue life here on Earth without this more adding to our suffering. Because if we have no water, we're going to be, everything's going to be dry.
So I think something like that Trans Mountain Pipeline is a big danger.
Yes,
for the environment and for
it
everything.
goes throughout North America. Right?
Yeah.
We don't, as Indigenous people, we don't want that as a development.
Mm-hmm. And how about the bond between, like, if it's the same origin, what is the bond between people in, like in Canada, in Alaska, in, the States, in Mexico, and later on, because we know about a lot of other civilizations, like the Aztecs, like the Incas, like the Mayas. Was there any direct connection between people in North America and these great civilizations that flourished in South America?
From my experience and what I've been working with is a holistic health model called the Reconnection Journey through the Tree Rings, and knowing that nature is our medicine and it helps provide our life here. Everything is provided. We look at trying to understand that as Indigenous people we have 3 sacred items, and it was leather, what we created our clothing with. It was the water. We all had that as a sacred life force, and we also had our feather. Right, so it was either the feather of the eagle or the feather of the condor, or we revered those feathers very, very highly.
And I think, again, wearing feathers was a form of respect, and it was like people were revered. If you had more feathers, you had more reverence.
Yeah, it was a part of their dress. It was maybe an aspect of coming into being recognized for courage. But the eagle's feather was very much a sacred item because you just couldn't find it. It wasn't abundant.
Of course,
if you found it, it was precious.
Of course,
right?
definitely. Okay, we'll just take a short musical break, but we'll be back because, and like I told everyone, this is a very exceptional episode. We'll be staying for 2 hours, and Cindy very kindly accepted that. because we're talking about the beginning of everything. We are living in today and enjoying today. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back soon. We're back again, and we still have our very exceptional guest, Cindy. So we were still talking about the relationship between nature and the Aboriginal people, and connected to every tiny, aspect and every tiny detail in nature. Mm-hmm. So things like feathers, things like like leather, things like water, everything. Yes. There is a connection. There is a very strong bond, mm-hmm. and you sort of become at one with them. And please, again, correct me if I'm wrong, because you're the expert here. When the Europeans first came here, and they had this stereotype that unfortunately was spread. They found the Aboriginal people burning big areas in forests, and they thought, oh, like they're very, like this is a barbarous act. Mm-hmm. And how can they burn pieces of forest and and burn the green areas and so on? But little did they know, and that this was, that the Aboriginals were great experts in agriculture and farming. And then later on, many years later, as the Europeans became very advanced, they found that it was a great thing the Aboriginals were doing, because they knew they were not just burning haphazardly. No, they knew exactly what they were doing. They were giving space for roots of big trees to grow. So please correct me if I'm wrong here again.
Mm-hmm. Well, there was two reasons for clearing the land. One was moving to the village, mm-hmm. making space, because we lived in longhouses, and longhouses range from between 50 to 200 people. And then the second aspect of it was replenishing the nutrients into the soil, mm-hmm. was what the fire was meant to do. Yeah. And it cleared way for those vegetables, or the vegetation, to grow with much more nutrients. The military records from General Sullivan was indicated that how much bushels of corn we had, mm-hmm. in storage, and how big our cornfields were. Those aspects of farming was done without a combine, without a horse and plow. Mm-hmm. Those large, acres and acres of fields, were done all by hand. And it was growing the corn, beans, and squash together. And then there was the orchards. And with that, it was a strong aspect of conservation and also preserving, right? So there was no aspect of feast and famine, mm-hmm. What people may have thought, because we had the system of looking at what needed to be planted this year, what was going to be saved for next year, and what was going to be eaten at that on a daily basis. So there was three aspects of planning for food, but there was also food left over for the neighboring community that might have lost their crop, or storage, right? So living completely off the land, there wasn't to be any wastage. So really, our relationship with nature was to utilize everything that we could, whether it was going to be clothing or tools or fire or some aspect of it. Everything was needed. And what I like about that is there was, there wasn't any hydro. We learned to live in our environment and make the most of it.
Well, that's really amazing because, like you said, like no horse and plow, like, and again, no artificial fertilizers, of course, but you sustained everything, and not only sustained it, but you helped it grow and flourish much more. And there is no famine. And this is unheard of, actually, in human history. Like, because all nations and all four corners of the globe, or let's say, with the exception of North and South America then, like, they've all suffered from famine sometime through their history.
The only time that we had suffered that famine was when General Sullivan and Clinton burned our food stores and our fields in that the War of Independence, right? So when the 13 colonies received their independence from Great Britain, they had their campaign against the Haudenosaunee and had burnt our food. So with that,
so during the 1770s.
Yes.
But nothing before the 1770s. It was always sustained. There was no like any famine, any hunger. People never suffered from that. And okay, so we talked about, we're still in the beginning here, but you mentioned something like, you mentioned the longhouse. And the longhouse is indeed a longhouse, really a long house.
Yes.
So how is the family life?
The family life was, the women were the leaders of the home. So the oldest woman, she would be considered the clan mother. And that clan mother, she was in charge of everything. And her husband would be, the support for her. And when any of the women had sons up into a certain age, he would be eligible to marry, and then he would go and live with his wife's family. So the men that lived there were just strictly the husbands and of the women. So so they would be the uncle. So all the women were maternal. And so for example, I'm a Turtle Clan. So so my daughters would live with me, and they would bring their husbands. So part of that is, again, all the girls would stay with us, but the men would be married out, and when and they would go and live with their wife's family. So we were very much a very strong matriarchal government, I guess you'd say.
Absolutely.
And way of life.
Absolutely, which is very different from most other, cultures where patriarchal societies are like, is the norm, really. Like the patriarch, the oldest male, is the leader. And usually women would go to their husband's house. But here it's the opposite. It's the other way around.
Yes.
So, and women were really revered. So like shows she's the clan's mother. So she is like the real, I would say, spiritual leader, the real role model that everybody would look up to.
Yeah. She would be responsible for helping to name the children's names. She would know the time when ceremonies would be taking place, and she would be educating her daughters, or and granddaughters, as to how to conduct themselves and what they need to learn, and so. The men supported the women. They protected them. They also went and got the food, and so it was the aspect of very strong roles but very supportive in the same instance. So the women would own the land, the home, the food, and the children would be like under their care, and it was an aspect of great honor to be even looking after the elders as well. So they weren't neglected.
So yeah, like women were not looked down upon or treated with disdain at all, or like seen as inferior, incomplete creatures. But no, it was exactly the opposite. They were a source of inspiration, source of comfort to everyone, and fully respected and revered by everyone too. And how about the houses? Like, why the long house? Like, so did it have only one family? Did the long house have only one, like a mother, father, and children, or did it have an extended family?
As the families grew, the rafters of that longhouse were extended, and so it would be still one family. So it would be such as your wife and your mother-in-law and her sisters. So your in-laws would be there too. And the aspect is that the women and the children were always together, and the men would be, going together and hunting. So they would be possibly away for days to weeks, because hunting for deer or whatnot, it was a time, right? So women had to stay with it together.
And how about the tipi? Like some people believe that it's like, is it a permanent house? Is it a temporary house? Is it like a seasonal house? Like
the longhouse.
Like the tipi,
the teepee.
The teepee, excuse my pronunciation. The
sorry.
teepee, or the tent.
Yeah, the teepee was from the plains native people that followed the buffalo for their hunts, and so they were more nomadic and were able to pick up and go and follow the bison or the buffalo, if you want to call them. So they're more in the central, like Canada and the U.S. Prairie land.
So in the prairies, you had more of these teepees, like, for nomads who wouldn't really settle in one place for long. They would just follow the bison and
right. And the longhouses were permanent structures, so they were more long lasting, and unless they had to go in and move the village to another location.
And how big were these teepees? Because the pictures we usually see it and things they're usually depicted as very small tents. Were they really like that, or are they bigger?
I've been only in one myself in my entire life, and that was it seemed very large to one person, right? So putting them up required more than one person, so it wasn't an instant thing where you just shake it and it pops up, right? So it takes about, I would say, I can only imagine, but I have never put a teepee up, but it would take a few people, so
Definitely.
yeah.
And so we talked about, the beginning, the family life, and is there history tells us that the very first people to come to Canada were the Vikings, or people basically coming from Iceland. So about 1,000 years ago, we had people living in Iceland who wanted to go to Greenland. But, there was a strong wind that made them land on the east coast of Canada instead of Greenland.
Mm-hmm.
How do you see this story? How do the First Nations see this story? Is this correct? Incorrect?
I really don't know. I couldn't speak to that without asking the Innu people and letting, because their stories would give more validation than I'm more of a woodland, Eastern woodland and Native person.
Yeah, and thank you very much for your honesty here. Like that's great. So then, about 500 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
The first alien or the first foreign person came to the east coast of Canada. We know that as Giovanni Caboto or John Cabot
Mm-hmm.
in 1497, 1498.
Right.
Came in the east coast of Canada, drew a map of the east coast of Canada. And is there like any record on the Aboriginal side or the First Nation side of the coming of this man?
I wouldn't know the details. Just that based on our treaties, our wampum belts, they talk about the two-row wampum about that they had made with the Dutch when they came, and it was the aspect of having them understand that we had our own ways of living, and the Europeans had their own, and if we were going to travel the same water, we'd respect each other with friendship and respect.
Okay.
And I think there's a lot of history there that kind of was missed, and it's only from milestones that time is recorded, the interaction with other people. So I really couldn't talk on that as much as I would love to.
Yeah, so do you think, like, how accurate, in your opinion, is the recorded history that we have today about, the 15th century and, the first Europeans coming here? So do you think it was just written from a European perspective?
I believe so,
Yeah.
because they had their own system of writing, and it was partially from the captains that came to Jesuit missionaries, and also, it was just a learning period where they were observing and trying to interpret what they're seeing.
Okay.
Right. So we have our own stories to share, and that's why I'm happy that I'm here to tell you, because I'd be being the first person that I know that there would be other people that would have studied this further than I have. So
No, but it's like it is the land we're living in here, and this great land was preserved by the First Nations. Like this great land we're all enjoying, and it was preserved for thousands of years. Like, the best anyone did here was preserve this land for like maybe 500 years. But the First Nations preserved it for tens of thousands of years before.
yes, I know that in our history that it's been orally shared. That we've, as Haudenosaunee, we've lived in the States in the Finger Lake region, but our hunting territory was all around the Lake Erie, the St. Lawrence River. So it was Lake Ontario as well. Like it was far, and it went far down in the south as well. So we've had relationships with other Native people, and so our stories are very enriched in history.
Okay, so again, carrying on with the story, and so after John Cabot came, and nobody really knows for certain, how did his journey end? How did his life end? Did he go back to England? Did he die on the way? Like, there are many stories out there. And then later on, if several years later, the French came. Jacques Cartier came. And history tells us again that he was the one who sort of created or like borrowed or like plagiarized or like tweaked the word Kanata and made it later on Canada. You as an indigenous person, how much do you believe this story?
Well, in our languages, I can only imagine again, you know, the aspect of where he learned it, and maybe it was his first word that he was able to pick up, you know, and to describe a village when he came, because it was basically wilderness. If you thought of a forest that never ended, this was it. This was Canada. So there was a clearing, and much of our people would be living together, right? So I really don't know, but it is a nice thought to think about, is that that our indigenous languages should be first and foremost.
Yeah, definitely. And another thing as well is the name that many people would use is Red Indians. And so Red Indians, there are two theories about that. So one theory is that, first of all, the Europeans, when they first came here, they thought that they reached they thought that they reached the East Indies.
Yeah.
So they thought they reached the east side of Asia or India.
Right.
And so that's where Indian came from. The other thing is that red, it said, like, there's a theory about the kind of costumes they were wearing. They were sort of red in color, or like something between orange and red. That's one theory. Another theory is like their complexion, color of their skin. So which one do you think is correct, or like are both of them wrong?
Well, from what I understand, our skin color was very much brown, very dark, and if we were wearing our buckskin, it would probably it could range in different colors, especially because if it was on a different animal compared to a moose versus a deer, it has different texture, and
Of course.
you know, so it depends on where that came from when it did, right? So yeah, so I really don't know the origin of that, right? So, but as Haudenosaunee people, we consider ourselves indigenous, and indigenous to Turtle Island, and we have that connection to the earth, and wherever we go on North America, it's part of our home.
Because you just mentioned that the red people come from, you talked about the red people, the yellow people, the white people, and the black people, the soil.
Yes.
So
the soil.
when you say the red people, who are you referring to?
And to North American Native people.
Native people.
Yeah, because we have our red soil. But
Exactly.
it would be, I'm not sure, I've never been to South America, but as to saying that indigenous people have that, have red soil in their different lands, it's very possible. I know it's just here, like locally near Hamilton, it's called the Red Hill Expressway. They talk about the red soil that's so rich, and
But so when you say the red people, like, are you referring to their complexion?
To the soil.
To the soil.
We're making that as the
soil, but when you say the yellow people, you're referring to the complexion too. Like, were you referring to their complexion?
It was it was when I was talking about the yellow people. It was the Asian people, and they were in our creation story. It talks about that the inside of the yellow material, the yellow substance that was on the inside of that bark, was what helped make their people. So yeah. So that story goes back and for many generations. So
you think there is a possibility somehow that it might have been like what they were wearing. It's
Possibly,
a possibility, yeah,
possibly.
but like not for certain.
Yeah, I couldn't prove it.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so when the French came, and this time they stayed,
Yes.
they didn't like so. History again tells us that when the French came, they allied themselves with some tribes that were at war with other tribes, and
Right.
they benefited from that. And they started, like trading with beaver pelt,
That's right.
beaver skin. So again, like warfare. How regular or common was warfare between First Nations?
I don't really know what what wars that they would be referring to, other than them, other than the hunting grounds being stressed because of being over hunted. And it was a territorial aspect of hunting grounds. So there, I could imagine there was clashes, but that they would be by individuals who had been hunting or
Okay,
whatnot, right?
but
So it's
but no tribe would go and raid another one, or like sort of.
from our history, I know that my people have had some aspects of clashing with other Native people, and some of them aren't here today. Some of those
Okay.
nations.
Okay, so so how is like the relationship like the First Nations vis-a-vis the Europeans at the very beginning. So the Europeans came, there were sailors, there were merchants, there were like missionaries who came, and some explorers, some geographers, some scientists, some soldiers as well came.
Right.
And so, how was the relationship in the beginning? Was it a friendly one? Was it were they hostile towards one another? Like, how was it like from your perspective?
From my perspective, we I think you could say that it was hospitable to some extent. It was learning about them as well, each side, right? So we didn't realize how much of the interaction was going to impact our people because of the different diseases that came about, and so that aspect started to have an effect on the interaction, such as smallpox and other diseases.
And you lacked immunity towards
That's
these
right.
diseases. Yeah.
Yes. So it started to, people were starting to get sick, and there wasn't an aspect of any solution to help them.
There's also a story about like plague from mice. Was that true as well? Like, there are some mice that were in the ships.
I believe that the mice that we see even today, it kind of like has its small appearance. I can't remember the actual illness that comes with it, with the mice. It's kind of left me, but that type of it's a carrier of a bacteria that can affect a person's living condition, whether it's from it eating something or leaving any type of fecal behind, or so when you live in that time frame, there wasn't there wasn't an abundance of medicine to help any type of disease or illness that Native people were facing.
Yeah, and so like the Europeans came, and beaver pelt trade started, and
blankets.
Yeah, so this was a great thing, and some people made fortunes out of it. And then there is also feudal system. So some people would, like some like landlords, some noble people, like they applied the feudal system that was popular in Europe at the time. So you'd have some people who would farm the land, and there is a big landowner who would take the crops and sell them and make fortunes out of them. And then there are some just, farmers that would do like most of the work, but get very little income. And fishing was another thing as well, like because the Atlantic Ocean was very rich in different kinds of fish and salmon and whatnot. So, but when did things started to change? So you said at the very beginning, it was, like they had friendly relationships, and because after the French stayed for a while and they started creating like the city of Quebec, 1608, and and Samuel de Champlain, and they started creating like things like New France, like Acadia, and so on and so forth. The English came again, and you had the Hudson's Bay Company by Henry Hudson, and then clashes started. So was everything okay between the First Nations and the French people until, because history tells us there was, like, the French supported some First Nations against others?
I can only imagine that they had their allegiance with certain Native people, and their aspect was of benefit at that time, and if they did, that was what it was.
Okay.
I couldn't really go into that relationship as to the conflict between Great Britain and France citizens with Native people, only that there was some type of relationship that was established, and if it had to do with land and had to do with access, it was the time of trying to benefit a foundation.
So how did the First Nations see the Europeans when they came here? Did they see the relationship as a mutual benefit? So like, you give me something, I give you something in return, or was it like a zero-sum game? So like you're like, your win is my loss. Did they see them as people who came to exploit them, or as people who like traded things with them? How did they see them?
I think you touched on all of those thoughts and how they perceived different people and different groups. I know that there was one aspect that was just orally told to me, was that this settler wanted to obtain some land, and he said, I want to take as much as far as this gun can be heard. So the Native person said, oh, okay, all right. Little did he know he brought a cannon with him to shoot off, and he said, well, I get all this land because the furthest point was it still could be heard. So if you look at the comparison of someone, how they got their land, it wasn't it didn't seem to be upfront.
Of course, yeah. And so, do you think that the Europeans used like the technological edge they had to exploit First Nations to a great extent?
Yeah, I believe so. There was another story that they said was how they measured land. They said, I'll take this thread from this blanket, and I'll take as much land as it uncovers, right? So this blanket might have been the width of this cloth here, and the Native person said, okay, you can have that, that much land, if thinking that it would be substantial, but they brought in like ropes with the spools of it, where it didn't seem to end, right? So you can imagine of the texture of what they brought to the table was enormous in reality.
And so they took advantage of the innocence. And I would not say they were not naive, but very innocent people. I wouldn't say that like it's not lack of intelligence or like they're not naive, but very innocent people. They took them for their word
At face value as to what that was, what was on the table being discussed, and not being taken to a whole new level of concept that that was taken up proportion.
And this brings us to talk about values for Aboriginal people, like things like honesty, and things like respect, like liberty, like equality. How are these values, viewed by the First Nations?
It's our character. Each individual represents their nation, and we're to hold our nation with such high regard, because we are an aspect of our family, our clan, our community, and where we come from, as to being forthright in our what we represent. So the integrity for us is incredible, because we believe we're not only representing ourselves and our families, but also our ancestors.
Okay. So steadfastness was something that was of great value. Like how would people see a liar, for example? Like if somebody lied or somebody cheated?
Well, it's talked about is that we're not supposed to judge that other person for whatever reason, that they have sort of exaggerated their stories or become storytellers. And we have come to know that things that happen in their life has made them the person they are.
Okay.
So a person who has not grown up with food, may have more of a tendency to maybe hide their own food,
Okay.
or be more liberal with their food, depending on what their perception is.
So you had insight. You didn't just take the facade, and you didn't just take the face value. You look deeper into things. And again, what you're saying is very similar to, like, do not condemn in order not to be condemned. Do not judge in order not to be judged. Again,
yes.
And these were sayings by Jesus, for instance. So later on, like, here starts the dark history, unfortunately. And very sad thing, like something like in cartoons, there's a Tweety Bird, and it's very famous, adorable, actually, cartoon character that everybody knows and most kids love. But and this is just a simple example. Like in one of the one time, Tweety Bird was with its owner, and the owner heard people saying, "Indians, Indians are coming," and the woman said, "Oh my goodness, Indians!" And she came and took her gun and started shooting the Indians. And Tweety Bird, as it watched, the Indians being killed, played this game and started counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 little Indians, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 little Indians, playing a game with Indians being killed.
Yeah.
And but in most movies, the Western movies, you'd say, oh, Indians, Indians. So like they're depicted as savage people, as barbarian people, as terrorists. While in reality, they're protecting their land. So how do you expect me to behave if you come and break into my house?
That's right.
Should I meet you with open arms? Like, what do you expect me to do?
Yes, that era of perception that was fostered by, I guess you say the cowboy. I want to say the love story with the cowboys. They depicted that the Native people were the enemies all the time, and it's unfortunate that the perception is today that they still feel that Native people are the enemy, but in reality, we were very welcoming. We helped, the first pilgrims to, settlers to come in and to survive, and that's where you have that annual Thanksgiving. And when you look at surviving here in this new world, and because they talk about that they were starving people, and it was it would be someone's ancestors that came to feed them and get them warm and ready for a new life here. So I can't say that we were on good terms before the balance got kind of unbalanced.
Okay.
Right. So and with that, we have our stories, and we're starting to talk about them. We're starting to set things straight, and and that's why I'm thankful to be here doing that, as to helping society understand that we're here to share the land and life here on Earth, right? But we have to take care of our Earth, our water, and that's just to sustain the next 7 generations.
And do you think that history is really doing justice to the First Nations? Because, the world talks about the Holocaust, which is a very barbarous thing, and it's very dreadful. It was a very evil act by the Nazis, Adolf Hitler. And, it's incredible ethnic cleansing, it's genocide, like killing innocent Jewish people. In Polish forests, more than 4 million people were killed in the forests, in gas chambers, in concentration camps, whatnot. People talk today about the massacres that were committed against the innocent Armenians, Assyrians, again, during World War I. And in the year 2000, the Pope John Paul II issued a great document, a great apology to all people that were hurt throughout the ages by the Catholic Church, in the name of the Catholic Church. And of those people were the First Nations. But this was concealed. So, excuse me, how just is history? Let me take a quick
Well, I
sip of water.
would like to say, that there's much to discuss, and there's like the stories that have been recorded in history.
Yeah.
They don't even cover all the traumas that individuals of nations have carried, and so it's good that it's acknowledged. It's good that that we can change, that leaders such as him can help change the world with that understanding. If individuals, or sorry, other leaders of the world could come together and not only in respect and peace, we would have much more progress in this world.
Definitely. But how big was the genocide, the ethnocide? How big was it? The the wiping out of First Nations,
of Native people. I don't have the exact amounts of populations of Turtle Island and in South America, but I do know that because of technology, it wasn't recorded as thoroughly as the wars that had came from World War I, and I know that there was a large amount, because they had there's history documents of that individuals would get a payment for the scalp of a of an adult or a child.
Oh,
So they were giving tickets even, so it's they had profit to killing Native people for how many they could.
but like the extent, do you think it was like to a huge extent? Like, how much did it affect the current population of the Native people?
I honestly think that we only represent only like 10-20% of what it was beforehand. So populations of Native people were, it was massive as a civilization in itself, right? It's just that we didn't have like the monumentous buildings that were created in Europe, right? So, but we did have our own way of life here. So, I can only look at the history of our people and how it's survived. I'm just grateful that, out of the individuals that have not survived, that's broken their line of survival. I'm grateful to be here today to talk to you, and continue on with promoting, Native people, promoting to be heard, to be seen, to be known. That speaks volumes as to my ancestors, and my grandmother was a clan mother, and she of the Onondaga Wolf clan, and they with that responsibility, it was always to teach and share their knowledge to the next generation. So with that, I just want to say, we may have been orally shared with us fragments of knowledge. We don't have all the knowledge, but we do, as a collective, can work together to bring that knowledge and have a better pathway to living and to survive and into the future.
So again, you're talking about, wiping out about 80% of the actual population, if not more, really. And another side, again, is like the psychological part and the cultural part. So the 20% that remained, there were, residential or boarding schools.
Yes.
Mandatory boarding schools for the children. And it was like, in these boarding schools, there was like a strategy of induced or like forced simulation. So assimilation, actually. So they were forced to assimilate one way or another. So what is your viewer perspective about these boarding schools? How did they affect the culture, and how did they affect the identity and the character of the First Nations? And were the First Nations able to overcome this huge trauma?
Mm-hmm. I would say that that the residential schools have affected, I would say, 6 generations of Indigenous people. It's affected their way of life, their language, their acceptance of being Native, the horrors that a child has been raised with from the time that they were possibly 3 years old to the time that they were 16, 17.
Mm-hmm.
There are different stories, and I have a very good friend who was a part of the Truth and Reconciliation, and they recorded 6,000 statements of people who had still survived
Mm-hmm.
that era, and it was harrowing for him, and he's carried that burden, their burdens, to help bring it to the front and center of society's knowledge now. And even though it's we're looking at rebuilding the relationship between Canada and my Indigenous people, it's a start, and it's we have to understand that lifetime that individuals have endured to today.
Mm-hmm.
They've had to deal with those memories. They've had to come to terms with that in their own way, and that experience has rippled down into the next generation. So it changes the whole aspect of an individual's character, from what it should be in a healthy state, or a healthy aspect of an Indigenous person.
And how did this affect, we'll be going on a short break now, but after the break, I really want to hear from you, again, how did this affect the self-esteem of First Nation people today? Because many people hear about First Nation people having, several psychological problems because of trauma, because they tend to be more introverts than extroverts. They prefer to be isolated. How did the very negative and very harsh black dark history that they had before affected that? Let's go on a short break and we'll be back.
هل تريد بيع، شراء أو استئجار عقار سكني أو تجاري؟ هل تبحث عن خدمات عقارية في تورونتو، ميسيساغا أو أي من المدن القريبة؟ والآن وكيلة العقارات سهير البشير تقدم لكم خدماتها المميزة مع مصداقية مشهودة في التعامل. كل ما عليك فعله هو الاتصال على الرقم 647-993-1967 أو عبر موقعنا على الإنترنت suhairalbashir.ca. سهير البشير لخدماتك العقارية.
من كل البلدان ومن كل اللهجات العربية جمعنا لكم الأغاني حتى يكون راديو عربز اف ام، صوت لكل الجالية العربية بأمريكا وكندا. خليكم معنا سوا على الهوا.
And we're back again, and we're continuing our journey in the heart and mind of a very special First Nation Aboriginal woman. And Cindy, we were asking about like the psychological effect and the drawbacks and the side effects of this, long history of discrimination, of isolation, of all kinds of oppression that the First Nations had. How did this affect their self-esteem, and how did it affect you, like you growing as First Nations child?
Well, that's a show in itself, but I'm gonna try my best to speak to that. Residential school had a different effect on each child as an individual, because they've all had different experiences, and whether it was violent or abusive or unfortunately they may have lost their life while staying in residential school or trying to escape. It was not something that a child ever dreamed of wanting to be at. And with it being forced, I know that as part of history, the individuals had tried to protect their kids and keep them out of the residential school, but they were imprisoned or put in jail for hiding them or trying to leave the areas. I know the first prisoners of Alcatraz were Native men, because they were trying to keep their kids from being taken away. And it would be for anyone, to think about if you were a parent and you just had a 3 or 4 year old child being ripped from your arms, or even just disappear and you don't even know where they are, as to the parent's loss and sense of that grief that they have as well. Knowing that you just having a child, that child is going to be taken away from you, and you may never see that child again. And then knowing possibly what happens in the residential school, it kind of eats away at that person's self-esteem and soul as to trying to live and survive and and trust other people. Some were able to not go to residential schools. For example, my cousin, who is the national, she was the first Indigenous person to read poems to aristocrats and loyalists and politicians, and her name was Pauline Johnson, and she, in that time frame that she was at, she was never raised in a residential school, but she had this, she was homeschooled, and she was able to travel across Canada and talk about and do recitals of her poems, right? So, and another relative of mine is Tom Lomboat, and he was taken to the residential school, but he escaped twice. The first time they found him and they took him back, and they had punished him for that. But he ran away a second time, and it was another relative that hid him. So he wasn't raised in a residential school. But if you think about, the people that were not raised in a residential school, they were very successful. They became a hero or a role model that was successful beyond racism and discrimination. That they found their success, and they were highlighted in society, and they began to be that light for other Indigenous people. And myself, I live by Brantford, and that city is called the Mohawk Institute, or some would call the mush hole. and that is less than 25 kilometers away from my home. So it was closed in 1970, and that aspect is that any a child could have been raised in the residential school, and just luckily it closed at that time. But I never went, and I can see some of the aspects of being raised, my ancestors being raised in the residential school, because they were content just being the factory workers or the
Okay.
the people that were just the working hard and had strong work ethics.
And how about the name change, for example? Like, we know someone like Joseph Brandt,
Yes.
and he's a Mohawk,
Yes.
but his name is Joseph Brandt.
Yes.
Yeah, and so most of the First Nation people today, they have these European names.
Right.
And Joseph Brandt, he led the Mohawk Indian, from the United States to Canada, but he is Joseph Brandt. Today we have the Joseph Brandt Hospital in Burlington, and there are many other places called Joseph Brandt, but was he really Joseph Brandt?
Oh, you mean with the names? Yeah, there was names that were given from the Christian aspect of it, and it was accepted, because it was easier for Europeans to have those names, and
but how did they, like the original people, receive these names? Like, do you think he was fine being called Joseph Brandt? Did he like it?
I don't think he named himself. I think it was from his parents, right? So it's part of that colonization that came about. For example, my name, I carry two names, my traditional name and also my English name, right? But it was, it's the aspect of colonization that we have.
Definitely.
But when we reclaim ourselves from, in this, great time, we're rising from that oppression that we've felt, systemic oppression. And so we weren't allowed to, as Native people, weren't allowed to leave the reserve, as we'd call it, that aspect of control. There was an Indian agent that you had to get permission to leave to go to the city, and it was for a certain time, and you had to tell them for what reason. And a lot of people, to avoid the residential school, tried to move away from the reserve so that they were not assimilated in that same fashion, right? So I think with the work that I do is just to promote Native people and what we bring to today. I support the arts and culture, and with that, it's just to help our Native people, inspire them to be the best that they can be.
Definitely. And until today, like how do you feel when you see these movies and cartoons and whatnot that are still, unfortunately, although with a much lesser extent today than before, but there is still this stereotype about the natives, and how do you feel?
Well, until we get into our people grow into these areas to help make that change. I know, unfortunately, we're going to still have to see that same cartoon that I know I've seen it myself. But our stories are coming out. They're being written in books. And there's cartoons, and there's it's starting, and just given an opportunity to work in partnership and collaborate, you'll see a lot more. And the same with our Indigenous music. Our fashion, it's coming.
Absolutely. And speaking of music, we'll go to another break now, and listening to another piece of Aboriginal music, and which helps us to raise our spirits, absolutely, and become at one with nature. So don't go away. And wasn't this lovely? It's really breathtaking. It's fantastic, and you know those great people, the
Yes.
artists. Yeah.
Yeah, they're very good friends of mine, and I
wow.
like to promote their music anytime I can. It's on my bucket list that I would be singing with them one day.
Oh, fantastic, fantastic! Like really, and you really feel the spirit of nature there. Like there is something. So now moving to today, to the present. How do you see the representation of the Native people in something like the Canadian Parliament, something like the provincial Parliament, in the Canadian Cabinet, and whatnot? Like, how do you see that? Is there any fair representation of them?
I am not really sure. You see, my uncle is a chief, and my aunt is a clan mother, and so they represent our traditional government, like one aspect of it, and so I know that in our ways, like my people wouldn't be at that level in their government because of the we have our own, right? So why I'm saying that is because in 1924 in the in 1924 the Indian Act was put in, like was implemented, in that the government took out, did not recognize anymore, abolished our traditional government, and one of the things is that it was an illegal election, basically because it was going to happen one way or another. So, for example, that first elected council that was put in place, they had only basically out of 12 councillors, the first councillor voted for himself, and if they were married, then that was their second.
Okay.
So if you in the Brantford Expositor, it said that first elected council was put in with 52 votes, and that's 52 votes out of the mass of thousands of people that lived in that community. Even if there was just one vote, it was going in.
So again, like how do First Nation people see themselves as Canadians? Because like this is the Canadian Parliament, the Canadian cabinet, but you are much older than Canada.
Yeah.
Canada's just a baby compared to you. So how do you see like your relationship with the name Canada?
It's very interesting that you say that, is because when Canada was called the Dominion, right? And so from our history, it was the Duke that came to Six Nations, and the Six Nations had came here, like it had came together to represent the Duke, to be a part of of their government. And so that's how Canada was born, and that's why they have this birth date, is because the Great Britain had relinquished their dominion over Canada to be separate. But and in that aspect, we were allies to Canada. We were allies to this land, and we were, if you want to think about it, we were here to protect our land. And it's basically, even all the national parks and all the crown lands, they are rightfully ours. And it's just that it should be, returned back to the Indigenous people as to being the original caretakers of that land, right? So as a saying that we're Canadian, we were here before Canada was created. So we have much more of a loyalty to this land because we are part of it. We go back to the earth, and we become a part of that land. It's just like your places of origin. You're going back to the motherland. This is our motherland.
And how's your feeling like for people like myself, or like any immigrant coming here, any new Canadian? Like nobody asked to take your permission. Nobody asked are you okay with me coming here or not? And I became a Canadian without any permission from your side, and I'm staying here for life. I have my full rights here, and nobody took your permission at all. How do you feel about that?
Well, as individuals, I know we reside together, right? And so we have to have that understanding, learning about each other, and then have that respect as friendship to coexist. And that aspect of learning about one another, that's what I do. I help other people understand Indigenous arts and culture, and that awareness of us being peacekeepers or the ambassadors of peace. It's a part of us, right? So we have fought our battles and our wars, and we try to accept other people as a relation, and again, that mutual respect has to be there, though.
And how do you see somebody who's like a 10th generation Canadian, for instance, who would look at a newcomer and tell him, this is my land, like you guys came to us here, and you don't have that right, like we're older, like I'm more Canadian than
seniority.
You. Exactly. They have this edge. And moreover, some of them are really afraid, they're very uncomfortable because they see that these new immigrants are changing their comfort zone or their way of life. And isn't this ironic?
It is. It is.
Extremely ironic.
And they are.
You guys did it before. You guys did that before, big time, to the actual owners of the land. Now you're afraid but you're complaining that other newcomers are just doing a minor damage to your style of life. You can't accept that. But you're absolutely fine with totally annihilating, totally ruining, totally wiping off the face of earth the style of life, and even the people themselves that originally owned this land.
Yes. I've witnessed it. And this the only thing is now you know how we feel. Yeah. As to how something that's changing in your life or your world, and it's had a impact. But they only have a fraction of it. Only a fraction.
Yeah, of course, a tiny fraction of it. Yeah. It's nothing compared. Yeah. And so right now, like, there's starting to be a lot of recognition for Native people's rights. Now like Canada today talks very openly about this very negative history. which is something that most nations don't do, actually. Most nations do not talk about their negative history. But Canada does really talk about this negative history, all kinds of discrimination that happened and all kinds of oppression that happened first and foremost to the First Nations, and then later on to, the Chinese and the Ukrainians, the Japanese, etc., etc. Do you think that's good enough so far? Again, with no real representation of the Aboriginal people in the decision-making, institutions in Canada.
Mm-hmm. Well, I can only say that, and go back to what I was talking about, is to developing that relationship of understanding with our people, with newcomers, because within years they could be taking a political aspect that would have an impact in our future. Mm-hmm. And so I can only say is that if we have that understanding of our past, to know what our present day is, mm-hmm. we'll have a better outlook on our future as to understanding what our needs and wants and desires are.
And what are your aspirations for the future? What are your dreams for the future?
Dreams, I can only ask, that we clean up our mess. Mm-hmm. It's one thing that is now, the waste is becoming to great concerns. Mm-hmm. And we need to look at aspects of the importance of the safety of the land, the mining, the mm-hmm. fracking, the pipelines. It's becoming very unstable, and I just hope that scientists are actually recognized as to what they've been studying all this while to help our environment. And I would really, I know that we're all concerned about the weather and how it's impacted to the farmers, flooding, fire. It's going to be harming our very existence to survive.
And you're very, very, sensitive towards the environment, much more than any, environmentalist today, or any green, life supporter. It was part and parcel of your, of your culture. And another thing, today you brought with you some realia or an artifact. Can you explain to our viewers what is this spoon-shaped net? What is this?
That is a very miniature lacrosse stick. It's a wooden lacrosse stick. Mm-hmm. My grandpa was a stick maker, and he's actually famous. His name is Enos Williams, and he made sticks out of hickory tree. And it would be shaped in that, and my grandma and my aunts would be weaving that netting in there. And
so it looks more like a cane, actually. Well, more like a cane.
It does, but
than a spoon. It's a cane, and there's a net. Inside.
Well, like I said, it's just miniature. But the aspect of it is it's a game that men would play to help settle disagreements, to prevent war. Mm-hmm. It was also a medicine game to help individuals feel better. That is a game in their honor, and it was sort of like a healing or a friendship that would have to take place.
And today lacrosse is the official summer sport of Canada.
Yes.
And but how different is modern lacrosse from the original one? So now we have two goals, and and you don't use your hands, you just use mm-hmm. the net, and again, was there an original name for it before lacrosse? Is there an original
There is, I can't remember the actual word, but
Okay.
lacrosse itself, it was the original stick was made out of wood, and today the head is made out of like a aluminum and plastic. The the stick itself, it was what you call it? This stick itself would be like for growing up for as a child all the way to their elderly, right? So the actual game traditionally it would have 2 blocks of wood as posts, represent posts.
Okay.
And they say in our way is that the posts went all the way from the ground to the heavens. And so
Okay,
it
so-
wasn't just a little
So there's no
thing.
crossbar.
No, there wouldn't be a crossbar.
So just a right and left post, but no crossbar.
That's right. Yeah. So
Okay.
if that ball crossed over, broke the line to that, then it was considered a goal.
Yeah. So from like heaven to earth.
Yes.
Yeah. This is how high the goal was. So there's no crossbar at all. Oh wow.
Yeah. So it was completely different, and that was played in a field. So it wasn't. We never had an indoor box to play. So field lacrosse would even have a much longer stick. This would be an example of a box lacrosse. So
Fantastic.
I wanted to give this to you as my appreciation and
Whoa,
gift.
like I'm speechless, really. Like it's a surprise. I didn't know anything about it. It's just like a live surprise. Thank you very much. I will really cherish it very much, and it's a great honor, really, to receive something like that from the true owners of the land. It's a great honor, really, and before going on air, like it's suddenly thought about it that it's very important. It's quite strange for me because the 2 official languages of Canada are English and French, and none of the Aboriginal languages at all. To become a Canadian, to become a permanent resident here, and to become a citizen here, you must have a level 4 or niveau 4 for the French. You must have a level 4 in your listening and speaking of English or French, preferably both. If you're bilingual, you'll have much better chance of working and living here in Canada. But how about the Aboriginal languages? I was always wondering, shouldn't we at least know the basics? At least out of minimal respect.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, we should talk your language. We should talk your language. This is your land. And before, went on air, you showed me that there's an app.
Yes.
If you can kindly share with our viewers and listeners that can help them learn the language.
Yes, Six Nations Polytechnic, they had developed 2 apps to learn Cayuga and also Mohawk, and they can be downloaded for a Apple phone and also an Android phone.
So what is the name of the app again? It's
Cayuga is spelled Cayuga, and it would have a purple and white eagle over the Tree of Peace.
Perfect.
And it would be for Mohawk as well. And Mohawk is spelled Mohawk.
And I really would encourage, I was talking to Cindy about that I would love to be a first student if there's any classes for native languages, definitely. And
I know that McMaster University is offering Cayuga and I believe Mohawk languages to learn.
But that's a very small scale.
Yeah.
Look at, for example, the LINK program. It's everywhere. Learning English is just everywhere.
That's right.
So shouldn't we have the same thing for native languages?
I think so. I think we're going to work on this.
Yeah, definitely. Now, before we end this exceptional episode, and this will be a surprise for Cindy. She didn't know anything about it. I'm going to ask her on air. I'm going to embarrass her on air right now. And she's a singer.
Oh, yeah.
So guess what? I'm going to ask you to do.
Oh, no.
Yes. Yes, please.
Oh, no. I didn't. I wasn't even prepared for it to be singing.
And that's the best part of it.
I know. Yeah. No. I think I'm going to just save that. And but I do want to invite people to look at. No.
Come on, just a little bit. We close our eyes.
I
Nobody
know.
can see you. Nobody can see you. No, I can't see you. And our viewers are like, they can promise to close their eyes too.
Oh, I know. I'm really, really shy right now. But I do appreciate it. But maybe next time on the show, I'll be ready.
But I think our viewers would give you a thumbs up, like for sure they want to listen to you.
I will try it for next time. For real.
Not even a little hum?
No.
Not even a little hum?
No. Nice try.
Well, keep it till next time then.
Yes.
We'll definitely keep it till next time.
And for everyone, I just wanted to tell you that I do have a book that you can learn more about me. It's called Recover, Rebuild, Reclaim Self, and you can find it on Amazon.
Perfect. Mm-hmm. And what is your message to like all the viewers here all across Canada, and we have viewers again all across the United States of America? Mm-hmm. What is the message that you want to give to them from the true owners of this land, the first owners of this land? What is the message you want to give to them? What kind of insight you would ask them to have when they deal with Native Americans?
Well, I would like to give that message of peace, strength, and a good mind, and trying to help our environment become a better place and to be more sustainable. If everyone could just pitch in, just once a day, or if we can collaborate on new innovative ideas, those are things that are going to be changing the times that are ahead of us.
And again, we're sadly coming to the end of this, exceptional, really exceptional night. And I really can't thank you enough. Cindy. It was a great honor and pleasure.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
For myself. And I wish it was the same for all our listeners and viewers. And, we're living on the richest land. We have more rivers than all the world rivers combined. We have an extremely rich environment, and it's an ancient environment. Like the beautiful environment we're enjoying today was not born today, mind you, never. It is impossible to have such a rich environment in this continent in general, and in Canada in specific, if it was not taken very good care of across the ages. And without this beautiful environment, we'll not have anything at all. And if there's someone to thank for this great environment, it is the First Nations. And if they protected the environment, this tells you a lot about them, a lot. Today, the most civilized people, the most intelligent people, the most knowledgeable people are the people who take care of the environment. If you are pro the environment, people would look up to you and they would respect you very much. So those First Nations, they love the environment. They united with the environment. The earth is their mother. And it is the absolute reality. The earth is their mother. They are part of this earth. They are brothers and sisters to the plants and animals. What's more civilized than that? How more civilized can you be? How more humane can you be? This is real humanity. We have a lot and a lot and a lot to learn from this great civilization. It's about time that we really treat those people with the respect that they deserve. I think it is a duty for every single person living on this land to do their very best to know much more about those great people, to come closer to them and to support them and to help them, reach their full potential and to realize their dreams, because their dreams are our dreams too. Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Cindy, again and again and again. I can't thank you enough. Really, it was a real pleasure to have you. Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. And really looking forward to maybe in the future we can do this interview in the native language. We'd love definitely to have you as our guest time and again, because we just touched the tip of the iceberg, really.
Yes.
And I think there's much more to say. Dear listeners and viewers, thank you very much for being with us, and really looking forward to seeing you next week. But please, remember everything that Cindy talked about. It really affects the future of this land, the future of this world. I wish you have a very pleasant, peaceful night, and really looking forward to meeting you again next week. And for Arabic speakers, don't forget our meeting coming Monday at 7. Until we meet again, everybody, have a very pleasant night. Take good care.